It was a typical day for Jake. He had just finished his shift at the spaceport and was sitting at a local cafe, sipping his drink and staring out at the stars. He had always loved looking at the sky, but today his thoughts were different. He didn't know why, but he felt a bit bored. The routine of his life felt too predictable, too safe. He was a young man with big dreams, but little direction. Jake wasn't the kind of person who took life too seriously. He made jokes, cracked witty remarks, and lived for the thrill of the moment. Today, however, he was tired of all that.
Maybe.
It was the endless hours at the spaceport. Or maybe it was the fact that he was still single at the age of 27. But he was starting to feel like something was missing. Maybe a change, a big one, was exactly what he needed. He let out a sigh and leaned back in his chair. "Wouldn't it be great if I could just ask for a wife?" he muttered to himself, just like that. Someone strong, beautiful, and out of this world? Maybe an alien princess? Or a space warrior? Yeah, that'd be nice. Jake chuckled at the idea. After all, who would take a comment like that seriously? It was just a passing thought. It was nothing more than a joke to entertain himself for a few minutes. But what Jake didn't know was that the universe had a way of hearing such things, even if they were said in jest. As Jake continued to sip his drink, an unusual event began to unfold. The ground shook slightly beneath his feet, causing his drink to ripple. At first, he thought it was just a small tremor, something common on this planet. But then, the sky above him darkened. The stars, which had been twinkling so brightly moments before, seemed to vanish in an instant. A strange noise filled the air, a deep hum. It's like something large was moving through the atmosphere. Before he could even think about what was happening, a massive shadow appeared in the sky. A sleek, gleaming ship descended from above, its shape unfamiliar and otherworldly. The ship was enormous, unlike anything Jake had ever seen before. It had strange, glowing markings on its hull, and it was heading straight for the town. Panic spread through the people around him, but Jake couldn't help but be fascinated. He stood up, his heart racing with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. Was this the sign he had been waiting for? Alien ship, right above him, just moments after he had jokingly wished for a wife from another world. The thought made him laugh, but it was quickly replaced by confusion as the ship landed with a soft thud, barely making a sound. The crowd began to scatter, running in all directions, but Jake found himself frozen in place, his feet unwilling to move. What was this? Was this some sort of joke? Is this a setup for a movie? Or was something truly extraordinary about to happen? The hatch of the ship opened with a soft hiss, and out stepped a figure. At first, all Jake could see was the silhouette of a tall, regal-looking figure. As the figure stepped into the light, he saw her clearly for the first time. She was stunning. Taller than most humans, with long, silver hair that shimmered like liquid mercury. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes gleamed bright red that glowed like embers. She wore a black and silver armor that looked more like a second skin than clothing, and her posture was confident, almost regal. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Was she real? Or was this some sort of dream? Without a word, the woman walked towards him. The people around them were still running, but Jake couldn't take his eyes off her. There was an undeniable power in her presence, an energy that made everything else fade into the background. She moved gracefully, with the poise of someone who knew they commanded attention. When she reached him, she stopped, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. Jake's mouth went dry, and he struggled to find the words to speak. You're real?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman smiled, a faint but knowing smile that sent a shiver down his spine. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she extended her hand, palm up, and said, "Yes, I am real, and I am here because you asked for me." Jake blinked in confusion. I didn't ask for anyone. I was just ... I was just joking." But the woman didn't seem to be joking. She stood tall before him, her gaze unwavering. "You may have spoken in jest, but the universe listens to all requests, even the ones made in humor. And so, I have come to answer yours." Jake's mind was spinning. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a prank, right? It's a huge setup by someone, some crazy alien reality show. But everything felt too real, the ship, the woman, the way the air seemed to hum with the presence of something ancient and powerful. He opened his mouth, trying to think of something to say, but the words didn't come. How could he speak when standing in front of something so extraordinary? "I am your Warbride," she continued, her voice calm and sure. "You are the one I have been sent to marry, as foretold by my people. I am here to fulfill the pact." Jake's heart skipped another beat. A Warbride.
This was getting too real too quickly.
Wait. Hold on, he stammered, trying to make sense of the situation. A Warbride? You mean like a wife? Like a real wife? He couldn't help but laugh nervously. This is all some mistake, right? Just said that as a joke. The woman's red eyes gleamed, but her expression softened. No mistake. I have come to you, as you have called, and my people have long awaited this moment. Jake stood there, still unsure of what to make of the situation. Was she serious? Was she actually saying she was going to marry him? The woman seemed to sense his confusion and took a step closer. It is not just a marriage, human. It is an alliance, a union between our two species that will shape the future. And I, your Warbride, will be the one to stand by your side. Jake could hardly breathe. What in the galaxy was going on? Jake sat down on a nearby bench, his legs too shaky to hold him any longer. He still couldn't believe what had just happened. One moment he was joking about wanting a wife from another world, and the next, a vampire Warbride was standing in front of him, declaring that she had come to fulfill some prophecy. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. The woman who still hadn't given him her name stood calmly in front of him. Her red eyes gleamed in the dim light, and her silver hair cascaded over her shoulders like a waterfall of starlight. Despite her seemingly otherworldly appearance, there was something undeniably human about her presence. It wasn't just her beauty or grace. It was something deeper, something ancient. "Are you really going to marry me?" Jake asked, his voice shaky. He wasn't sure if he was laughing or panicking. I wasn't serious." "I didn't think I know you weren't serious," she said, cutting him off with a soft smile. "But sometimes the universe has a way of answering things, even jokes. Your request was not as random as you think. It was fate." Jake shook his head, still not believing what was happening. "Fate? What are you talking about? You said something? About a prophecy? What does that mean?" The woman tilted her head slightly, as if she was studying him. "I am from a race of warriors and rulers, from a distant planet in the outer reaches of the galaxy. We have watched your world for centuries. The time has come for our people to expand, and we need your bloodline to unite with ours to bring about a great change." Jake blinked, trying to wrap his mind around the words. "My bloodline? What are you talking about?" "You are not just any human," she said with a calm certainty. "You are part of a rare line, one that has been quietly protected and preserved. Your ancestors played a role in the history of my people, and your blood carries the key to the future of our species." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean, the key?" The woman stepped closer, lowering herself to sit beside him. She kept her voice calm and even, as if explaining something simple. "My people have been at war for centuries, and we are now at the brink of something far greater, the bloodline. You carry is not just rare, it is essential. Your people will be the ones to help us overcome our greatest enemy. But we cannot do it without uniting our forces." Jake's head was spinning. "You came all the way from wherever you're from just to find me?" "Yes," she said with a nod. "The alliance between our two species will be more than just a marriage. It will be the foundation of something powerful. It will shape the future of the galaxy." Jake still couldn't believe it. "And you want me to marry you? Just like that? I don't know anything about any galactic war or anything. I'm just a guy living here on Earth trying to get by. I've never even thought about any of this." "I understand that this is a lot to take in," she said, her voice soothing. "This is not just a simple marriage. This is a union that will affect the entire galaxy. You are the one chosen to bring change." Jake shook his head. "But why me? Why not someone else?" "Your bloodline," she repeated softly. "It has been hidden from you, kept secret for generations. Your ancestors made a pact with my people long ago, and now that pact must be fulfilled. The time has come. Jake leaned back, trying to absorb everything she was saying. None of it made sense, but at the same time, it all felt too real. The weight of her words, the calm confidence in her voice, it was hard to argue against. But why a marriage? Jake asked, his voice still uncertain. Why not just, a partnership or alliance? Why does it have to be a marriage? She looked at him, her red eyes reflecting something deeper, something ancient. The bond of marriage is not just emotional, it is also spiritual and physical. It symbolizes the merging of two worlds, two peoples, in a way that no other alliance can, and it is necessary for the power we need to defeat our enemies. Jake frowned. I still don't understand. Who are these enemies? And what exactly do you want from me? The enemies are those who seek to destroy both our people and your planet, she said, her voice hardening for a moment. They have been hunting us for centuries. We're not the only ones out here in the galaxy. There are many who would see us fall, who would seek to claim the power we possess. You, with your bloodline, will be the key to defeating them. Jake was silent for a long time. The words she spoke were like nothing he had ever heard before. Part of him wanted to laugh and think it was all some elaborate joke, but another, part of him, something deep inside, knew this was real. This was happening. You're really serious about all of this? He asked, still trying to grasp the situation. She nodded, her expression softening just a little. I am, and so are the others who have sent me. We do not make this offer lightly. Jake looked up at the sky, the stars twinkling above them. This was too much to process. One moment, he was just a regular guy. The next, he was being told he was the key to something far bigger than himself. It felt like a dream, but the weight of her words, the seriousness of her gaze made it impossible to dismiss. So, what happens now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We begin the union, Jake, she said gently. We begin by joining our forces. And then, we will take on the enemies that threaten us all. Jake felt a strange sensation deep in his chest. He had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was certain. His life had just changed forever, and whether he was ready or not, he was about to become part of something much larger than anything he had ever imagined. Jake had always thought his life was a series of small, manageable moments: work, dinner, the occasional weekend with friends. But after meeting his so-called Warbride, everything seemed to be spiraling out of control in the most unimaginable ways. He hadn't signed up for intergalactic wars or alien politics, yet here he was, standing next to a vampire warrior who had just told him he was the key to winning a galactic battle. The only problem? He had no idea what he was doing. Her name was Lyra, and as she began to explain the training he'd need to go through, Jake found himself feeling more than a little overwhelmed. She wasn't just some warrior princess from another world. She was a leader, with centuries of experience and a keen sense of purpose. If there was one thing Lyra made clear from the start, it was that this wasn't just about a marriage, it was about a mission, and Jake was now a part of it. Over the next few days, Jake tried to adapt to his new reality. Lyra had explained that their union wasn't just symbolic, it was a vital step in securing the future of their people. But how was a regular guy supposed to help save the galaxy? He didn't have superhuman strength or alien powers. All he had was his curiosity and his will to survive. First things first, Lyra said one evening, as they stood in the middle of a large, high-tech training facility that seemed to appear out of nowhere. You'll need to learn how to fight, not just with your fists, but with your mind. My people have trained for centuries, and every battle requires more than just strength. It requires strategy. Jake wasn't sure if he was cut out for this, but he couldn't exactly back out now. His feet were already in the deep end. Lyra began with the basics, teaching him how to use his environment to his advantage. In battle, she explained, you must always observe. Use your surroundings, your resources. An enemy will underestimate you if you do not look dangerous. But surprise them, and you will have the advantage. It was harder than it sounded. Jake was a quick learner. But this was nothing like the games or simulations he had seen. He was using real weapons now, holding them for the first time, trying to figure out the right stance, the best approach. Every move felt foreign, unnatural. But Lyra was patient, always there to correct his form, to give him pointers. She had an intensity about her, a sharpness in her eyes that kept Jake on his toes. She was used to being in control, used to making life-and-death decisions. The pressure on him was immense, but somehow, it also felt like he was learning from the best. Each day, the training intensified. They practiced combat in various forms, with Jake gradually picking up the moves and techniques that would please save his life in the future. Lyra was always there to guide him, but there was more to it than just battle. She had started teaching him about her people, their history, and the war they were facing. The more Jake learned, the more the weight of what they were doing pressed down on him. "It's not just a battle of force," Lyra explained one night as they sat in the quiet of their training space. "It's about alliances. It's about knowing who you can trust, who you cannot. My people have long been fighting an enemy that is both deadly and elusive. They've tried to destroy us for centuries, and we've had to fight not only with weapons, but with our minds." Jake listened carefully. He had no idea what kind of enemy she was talking about. But from the way she spoke, he could tell this wasn't just some routine war. This was bigger than anything he could have imagined. In the evenings, after the training sessions, they spent time together talking. Jake began to see Lyra not just as a warrior, but as someone who carried a heavy burden. She had lost so much in her long life, and yet she remained steadfast in her mission. He could see the emotional toll it took on her. She was not just some emotionless fighter. She had a past, a history filled with loss and pain. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, Jake asked, "Do you ever get tired of all this? The war, the fighting, everything?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, looking at him as if weighing her response. Finally, she said, "Every warrior grows tired, Jake, but some of us have no choice but to keep fighting. The enemy we face will not rest until we are gone. I fight not just for myself, but for the future of my people and yours." Jake nodded. He understood. He had always lived a life of small struggles, work, relationships, finding his way. But now he was caught in something so much bigger, something with real stakes. As the days went by, Jake started to feel a strange sense of connection to Lyra. It wasn't love, not yet, at least, but it was respect. She was strong, smart, and utterly dedicated to her cause. But what amazed Jake was how she had begun to trust him. He wasn't just some human bystander. He was her partner in this fight. And slowly, they began to understand each other. They spent hours working together, not just on training, but on strategy. Jake might not have had the experience Lyra did, but he had something else: fresh perspectives. He started coming up with ideas for tactics, strategies that Lyra admitted she hadn't considered. It wasn't just about physical strength. It was about using his mind, the way humans often did, to outthink their enemies. "I never thought I'd be here teaching a human about warfare," Lyra said one night, after they'd spent hours going over battle plans. "But in some ways, you've helped me see things differently." Oh, Jake smiled, feeling a small sense of pride. He wasn't just a participant in this mission, he was contributing. Maybe he didn't have superhuman abilities, but his mind, his creativity, had a place in this war. As the days turned into weeks, Jake's training became more intense. His body grew stronger, his movements more fluid. He wasn't the fighter Lyra was, not yet. But with every day that passed, he felt a little more ready, a little more sure of what he was capable of. And through it all, Lyra remained by his side. There was still so much to learn, and the road ahead was long. But for the first time, Jake felt like he wasn't just being dragged into this world, he was becoming a part of it. Together, he and Lyra were preparing for something far beyond their understanding, but with every moment their bond grew stronger. And that, Jake realized, was more important than anything else. He wasn't just training for battle, he was preparing to fight for the future. The days of training were growing more intense, and Jake was starting to feel the weight of the mission he had been thrust into. He had learned more about Lyra and her people than he ever thought he would. He knew that the war was coming, and Earth was caught in the middle of it. But no amount of preparation could have prepared him for what would happen next. It all started on a quiet evening, as Jake and Lyra were going over battle plans in their training space. They were just about to finish when the air around them seemed to hum with tension. The lights in the room flickered, and a strange noise filled the air. It wasn't the usual hum of their training equipment. This was different. Lyra's eyes immediately narrowed, and Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. Lyra stood, her movements swift and precise. "It's happening," she said, her voice a mixture of concern and determination. "The enemy is here." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "Now, I thought we still had time." Lyra didn't respond. She moved quickly, gathering equipment and preparing herself for battle. "The enemy doesn't wait for us to be ready." She said, "We must act now." Before Jake could say another word, they were outside. The stars above them seemed to flicker with urgency, as if they, too, knew something was about to change. The air had grown heavy, thick with tension. Lyra led him to a nearby transport ship, and they boarded without hesitation. As soon as the doors closed, the ship shot into the sky, leaving Earth behind. Jake looked out of the window, his mind racing. The ship was heading toward a distant, unknown location. "Where are we going?" he asked, trying to focus on something other than the chaos that was brewing. "The front lines," Lyra replied. "This is where the enemy will strike first." Jake swallowed hard, gripping the seat as the ship sped through the atmosphere. He didn't know what to expect, but he could feel it in his bones. The war was no longer a distant threat. It was real, and it was happening now. As they neared their destination, the ship slowed, and the surroundings became visible. The battlefield lay ahead, a chaotic scene of ships, explosions, and distant flashes. Of light, Jake's stomach twisted. He had never imagined anything like this. This was no longer just about training. This was about survival. Lyra stood beside him, her expression grim. "Stay close," she said. "Follow my lead, and trust that we can win this." The ship touched down on the rocky surface of a distant moon, where several of Lyra's allies were already engaged. In battle, Jake could hear the sounds of blasters firing and the distant hum of alien machinery. This wasn't a game anymore. This was war. The moment the hatch opened, Lyra was the first to step out, and Jake followed closely behind. The terrain was rough, and the air was thin, but there was no time to waste. Lyra led him toward the front lines, where soldiers both human and alien were fighting side by side. The scene was chaotic, filled with flashes of light and the sounds of combat.
Out.
Jake's heart pounded in his chest, and every instinct in his body told him to run. But Lyra was beside him, and he had to keep up. "Focus, Lyra," shouted over the noise. "This is just the beginning. We need to stop them before they breach our defenses." Jake nodded, trying to steady his breathing. His training had prepared him for this, but nothing could prepare him for the rush of emotions that came with stepping onto an actual battlefield. The fear, the uncertainty, and the adrenaline all combined into a single, overwhelming feeling. They reached the front lines, where several of Lyra's soldiers were holding off the enemy forces. The battlefield was filled with various alien species, all fighting for survival. Jake couldn't help but marvel at the diversity of the forces fighting beside him. These were not just humans and vampires. There were countless species from across the galaxy, all united against a common enemy. "Take position," Lyra ordered, snapping Jake out of his thoughts. She handed him a blaster, and he took it without hesitation. His training kicked in, and he raised the weapon, aiming at an approaching group of enemies. They were unlike anything he had seen before. Large, heavily armored creatures with sharp claws and glowing red eyes. The battle was intense. Jake fired his blaster, hitting one of the enemies in the chest, but there were too many. He had no idea how long he could keep this up. His heart was pounding, and his body was aching from the effort. But through it all, he kept moving, kept firing. Lyra was beside him, leading the charge, always one step ahead. As the battle raged on, Jake began to see the true extent of what they were fighting for. This wasn't just a war for power, it was a fight for survival. The enemy they were facing was unlike anything they had encountered before. They were relentless, and they had the firepower to destroy everything in their path. Minutes felt like hours as Jake fought alongside Lyra and her people. His training had prepared him for combat, but the reality of war was far more brutal than he had ever imagined. The sounds of explosions, the cries of soldiers, and the constant flashes of light made it hard to focus. But through it all, he kept fighting, kept moving forward. He wasn't just a human anymore. He was part of something much bigger, something that would shape the future of the galaxy. Eventually, the tide of the battle began to turn. Lyra's forces, bolstered by the human alliance, started pushing back the enemy. Jake, though exhausted, couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They were winning, for now at least. As the last of the enemy forces retreated, Lyra turned to Jake. Her expression was a mix of exhaustion and relief. "You did well," she said, "better than I expected." Jake nodded, though he didn't feel like he had done much. He had simply followed orders, tried to survive. But as he looked around at the battlefield, at the soldiers who had fought beside him, he realized that this was just the beginning. There was still much more to come, and he had no idea what would happen next. But one thing was certain. He was no longer just a man caught in the middle of someone else's war. He was part of something much larger, something that would shape the future of the galaxy. Whatever came next, he would face it with Lyra and her people by his side. The victory from the battle still echoed in Jake's mind, but the silence that followed was unsettling. Despite pushing the enemy back and reclaiming a portion of the battlefield, Jake could feel that something wasn't quite right. Lyra had led them through the conflict, and though her strength had been a guiding force, there was an air of tension about her. It wasn't just the aftermath of the battle. Something else lingered beneath the surface. The days following the victory were filled with repairs, strategy meetings, and brief moments of rest. Jake, still adjusting to his new reality, spent his time helping with whatever he could weather. It was assisting the soldiers with supplies or practicing his combat skills. He was beginning to get used to the flow of things, but the more he learned, the more questions he had. One evening, after a particularly long day, Jake sat with Lyra in the command tent. The sun had set, and the stars above were obscured by the massive clouds of warships and transport vessels filling the skies. He noticed that Lyra's usual confidence seemed a little strained, her brow furrowed as she looked over reports. She wasn't the same person he had met just weeks ago, the carefree, mysterious Warbride had transformed into someone who carried more than just the weight of the war. "Lyra," Jake said quietly, breaking the silence. "What's going on? You're not yourself." Lyra glanced up at him, her eyes tired but still sharp. "I'm fine," she said, brushing off his concern with a small smile. "This is nothing." Jake knew better than to accept her answer at face value, but he didn't push. He had learned the hard way that Lyra wasn't one to open up easily. Still, as the days wore on, the tension between them grew. A few days later, during a routine briefing, everything began to unravel. The room was filled with commanders and military leaders from different species, each one discussing the next steps in the fight. Lyra was at the front, giving instructions. Jake stood near the back, observing, still trying to grasp the full scope of the situation. But something happened that he hadn't expected. One of the senior commanders, a man who had been a trusted ally, stepped forward with a strange look in his eyes. He addressed Lyra, his voice calm but firm. "The humans have no place in this war." Jake's blood ran cold as the words sank in. "What did you say?" he asked, stepping forward. The room went quiet, and all eyes turned to him. Lyra's gaze hardened, her jaw tight. She didn't immediately respond, but Jake could see the conflict in her eyes. It was clear that she wasn't surprised by the accusation. This was something she had been keeping from him. "You heard me, human," the commander continued. "Your kind is nothing more than pawns in this war. You were brought here as a tool, not an ally." Jake's heart pounded as the weight of the words hit him. He looked to Lyra, his gaze demanding an answer. The confusion on his face was replaced by growing anger. How could she have kept this from him? They had fought side by side, and now he was being told he was just a pawn in a game he didn't even understand. "Lyra," he said, his voice shaking with frustration, "is this true?" Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time since they had met, Jake saw something different in her, something darker. She didn't immediately speak, as if struggling to find the right words. When she did, her voice was low but steady. "Yes," she said quietly, "but it's not what you think." Jake stepped back, stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The bond they had built, the trust he thought they had, seemed to crumble in that moment. He had been a part of this war for one reason: to help. But now he realized he was nothing more than a piece in someone else's game. "You lied to me," Jake whispered, his chest tight. "You used me." Lyra closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, there was no anger, only the weight of regret. "I didn't lie to you, Jake. I just didn't tell you everything. I couldn't, my people." She trailed off, the words hanging in the air between them. "There are things that go beyond your understanding. My people have been fighting this war for centuries. We have no choice but to do whatever it takes to survive." Jake felt a sharp pang of betrayal, but beneath it, he understood. Lyra had been trapped by her duty, by the expectations of her people. She had never asked for this either. The truth still stung. "Then what am I really supposed to do in all of this?" Jake asked, his voice rising. "Am I just some weapon for you to use? Just another soldier in your endless war?" Lyra's expression softened. She took a step closer to him, her hand reaching out. But Jake pulled away. "I never wanted to use you, Jake," she said softly. "I wanted you to be more than just a soldier. But the reality is," she paused, her voice breaking slightly, "the reality is that we need you. You are part of something bigger than either of us. The union between us, your bloodline and mine, is the key to ending this war. But it is also a burden. I have failed to tell you the truth." Jake's heart was heavy with emotion. He wanted to be angry, to lash out, but he also understood the pressure Lyra had been under. She hadn't been the only one with a choice. Taken from her, he was in this too now, whether he liked it or not. "Then what now?" he asked, his voice calmer now. "What happens next?" Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Now we finish what we started," she said. "But we do it together. No more secrets, no more lies. You are a part of this war, Jake, and whether you like it or not, we need each other." Jake stared at her for a long moment, feeling the weight of her words. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but he knew one thing: the war was far from over. There were still many battles to fight, and many truths to uncover. As the room around them began to stir with activity, Jake took a deep breath and looked at Lyra. They might have been thrown into this war by fate, but together, they would face whatever came next. The battle was just beginning. And this time, Jake knew he had to be ready for whatever truths were yet to be revealed. The war was far from over. Jake could feel it in his bones. After everything that had happened, after the betrayal, the confusion, the secrets, he knew there was no turning back. He was a part of this now, whether he liked it or not. But as much as he wanted to walk away, something deep inside him told him he had to keep going. Not just for Lyra, but for something bigger than them both. In the days that followed the shocking revelation, Jake struggled to come to terms with the truth. Lyra had been honest with him at least, but the trust they had built felt fragile, like it could break at any moment. They had been fighting side by side, but now Jake couldn't help but question everything. Was it all just strategy? Was he truly a part of her plans? Or had he been a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand? Lyra, for her part, seemed more distant than before. She had always been serious about the war, but now she seemed even more withdrawn. Her focus was sharp, and she spent long hours with her commanders, going over battle plans and strategies. But when it was just the two of them, the space between them felt much wider than it had before.
Yeah.
Jake wanted to ask her about it, but he didn't know how. Could they ever truly be on the same level again? One evening, after a long day of training and preparation, Lyra found him alone in the command center. The tension between them had grown over the past few days, but this time, she didn't avoid him. Instead, She stepped forward and met his gaze, her expression softer than he had seen in a while. "Jake," she began, her voice quiet but firm, "I know things have been difficult. I know you have questions. But I need you to understand something." Jake looked at her, his heart racing. He wanted answers, but more than that, he wanted to know if they could still work together. He didn't want to be just another soldier for her cause. He didn't want to feel like he was being used. But maybe that's all he was in this war, a tool to help win the fight. He had no choice but to play his part. "I'm listening," Jake said, his voice low. Lyra took a deep breath. For the first time, Jake saw the vulnerability in her eyes. "I didn't choose this war, Jake. None of us did. My people have been fighting for survival for centuries, and we've been forced to make decisions that I wish we didn't have to. But we have to keep fighting. It's the only way we can save ourselves and everyone else." Jake felt a pang of sympathy, but it was mixed with frustration. "So what does that mean for me? For us, are we just allies in this war? There more to it?" Lyra's eyes softened. "There is more. But I need you to understand that this war is not just about us. It's about the future. And if we don't succeed, if we don't come together, everything we've worked for will be destroyed."
Ow.
Jake stared at her for a long moment.
Ow.
Her words were heavy, and he knew she was speaking from a place of deep responsibility. But even so, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still being left unsaid. "I've seen the way you've changed since we met," Jake said, his voice steady. "You've been so focused on the mission that it feels like you've forgotten everything else. We're more than just soldiers, Lyra. At least I thought we were." Lyra's expression faltered for a moment, and Jake saw a flicker of regret in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words seemed to get stuck. She closed her eyes briefly, then looked at him with a mixture of sadness and determination. "I haven't forgotten, but we don't have time for anything else. Right now, the war. It's consuming everything. I can't afford to let my feelings get in the way." Jake's heart ached. He understood what she was saying, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. He had fallen into something far deeper than he had ever imagined, and now he was struggling to find his place in it. Could they really be more than just allies? Could they find something real, even in the middle of all this chaos? "I'm not asking you to choose between me and the war," Jake said, his voice quiet but firm. "But I need you to understand that I'm not just here because I'm useful. I'm here because I want to help. I want to be with you, Lyra. Not just in battle, but in everything." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to find the truth in his words. For a long time she didn't say anything. Then, finally, she nodded. "I know," she said softly. "I know, Jake, but I can't promise you that things will be the way you want them. This war, it's bigger than both of us. I don't know if I can ever be the person you want me to be." Jake took a step closer to her, closing the gap between them. "I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be real. And if we're going to do this together, we need to trust each other. No more secrets, no more lies." Lyra didn't say anything at first. Then after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "I can't promise you that everything will work out, but I will try. For you." The words were simple, but they meant everything to Jake. They weren't the perfect resolution, but they were a beginning. And maybe that was enough. The next few days passed in a blur of strategy sessions and battle preparations. The enemy forces were growing stronger, and the pressure on Lyra's people was mounting. The time had come to make a decisive move. Jake and Lyra worked side by side, and though there was still a quiet tension between them, there was also a new understanding. Jake knew that the war was far from over. There would be more battles, more struggles ahead. But for the first time, he felt like he was truly a part of something. Not just a tool in a war, but a partner in the fight for the future. With that, he was ready to face whatever came next.